Topic number one today is a debate that has been raging in the Discord all day. I would say this was an iconic day in Sleepers Discord history. Like just the amount of activity, like people were in mid-season form today, maybe preseason form. So it was a little more on edge and hot takey, but like just a lot of content possibilities and people throwing jabs at others, people polished. It was nice. Anyways, one of the topics that came up was player development, specifically in the confines of Purdue basketball and Fletcher Lawyer being an example of like, well, he jumped up from like a 33% shooter. I'm making up numbers. I don't know if that's real as a freshman to 42% as a sophomore. That's development. That's player development. And I like really pushed back on like, no, that's shooting variance. Like Fletcher just had a big time slump his freshman year. He's a great shooter. And then this got down a big rabbit hole of like what teams are actually good at player development, what coaches are good at player development, right? Because you look through the Big Ten, it's like the examples Purdue fans are giving me about player development are going back to like 2007. Like, oh, Etwan Moore really got a lot better. Okay, what, 15 years ago? Like if that's the fifth name on your list, how good is your program at player development? Illinois, how can we define what player development is at Illinois when they're so transfer heavy right now? Like
Right.
Did Marcus Damask and Terrence Shannon get developed at Illinois, or did they come in as finished products that were misused? And at the same time, if those guys developed, why didn't Matthew Meyer develop? Why didn't Dane Danger develop? Like I think Michigan has stunk at player development for a while, and they've put more guys in the pros, even in the Juwan Howard era, than half these programs have combined. So I wouldn't call that player development. I would call that like talent acquisition and poor coaching. And then Michigan State, you've heard my spiel on Michigan State player development through the years. It's like they used to be great. It hasn't happened for a while. But to me, that's more recruiting than it is development stopped. I think Izzo can still develop players. It's just less talented players have been in the building. So I don't know. This is kind of an all over the place question, but I kind of just want your thoughts on this because you weren't really involved in the discussion today. Who do you think the best player development program is in the Big Ten? And then outside of that, too, like in college basketball?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is in college basketball is actually Kansas. Just because I think Kansas does a great job of like I think guys like even guys who don't go on to the next level, I think they've had a lot of guys who have developed, they have like the Devontae Grahams, Frank Masons of the world. And then there was that stretch where they were just developing wings for the pros, like Jalen Wilson, Ochai Agbaji, Christian Brown. And then you go back even further, like they had guys like Embiid, even though they were highly rated guys. But like Kansas has always been really good at player development in my eyes. In the Big Ten, it's a little bit harder, but the first school that came to my mind, and it may be a little crazy, does Iowa need a shout and Fran McCaffrey need a shout in player development?
Really? Talk to me on that.
I mean, these are all like lower rated guys, but I think they all entered college and got better by the time they let like both Murray twins,
Hmm.
Luca Garza, and not
Hmm.
only did he get those guys developed better, he turned those guys into all Americans.
Hmm.
You had guys like Wieskamp come through the fold. Even going back to like other players like the Peter Jocks of the world, the Andrew Whites, like they had a lot of guys come through Iowa, not really prestigious guys, and just kind of been guys who have, I think, gotten better by the time they leave. I really used to like Michigan State when it came to this, but obviously, like you stated, the past couple of years, player development has been very, very seriously lacking. So I don't know, but I feel like saying Iowa in that fold doesn't feel right at the same time.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because there's this cutoff where it's like I saw this happen on both sides with Beeline at Michigan because there was a time where Beeline could not get the best recruits, right? And so any good player he had at West Virginia or at Michigan was a guy that he developed or a guy that he found that was just way underrated by the recruiting services. And sometimes I think the word developed gets used when it's not even development. It's just like the recruiting ranking services stunk or like did
Right.
did not do their due diligence by this player. Sometimes you'll just stumble into a kid that's 5-star ready that was rated as a 2-star. That's not necessarily development. It's just a misrating. But Beeline was great at that, right? Like you think back to his early days, Stu Douglas and Zach Novak were guys that did not come in ready to be Big Ten starters and left 4 years later after being 2-star recruits. And they were some of the best starters in the league. Trey Burke was going to go to Penn State. Beeline convinces him to come to Michigan. He's the National Player of the Year in 2 years. Yeah, of course there was some player development there. Tim Hardaway Jr., 3-star to a 10-year NBA career. That's development. Then Beeline started getting star recruits, and we saw the opposite side of it too. Like he started putting more guys in the pros when he got more 4-star and 5-star kids. But we also saw like Cam Chapman, one of the highest rated recruits Beeline ever got. He never played in the NBA. Like Zach Irvin. I think Zach Irvin got better in college. Zach Irvin was supposed to be an NBA player if all went well. It didn't happen. So I kind of get frustrated when I hear like the development term being thrown around because I think every fan of their team is going to argue their program has great development if their program's in a healthy spot. And it to me, the range gets moved, like the needle gets moved to just make the argument that your coach is really good without much way to define what development actually means. Like, is Purdue a great program for development because Fletcher Loyer shot 10% better from 3 this year? Or did they put the right people around Edey finally by like taking a guy in Ethan Morton who got worse over the course of his career, was a high rated recruit, by the way, got worse. Like, that's not development. So, but at the same time, Purdue's the best big development program in the sport, right? Like
Right.
you know, if you're a Daniel Jacobson, a 3-star, 4-star kid, you're going to come in and by the time you leave, you're going to be polished and really good. So I don't know. It's just kind of one of those weird things. Like out of the Big Ten schools, if it was like Michigan State, Illinois, Indiana, Purdue, what one do you think is like the development school right now? Or is it all of them? Like, is that not a question we can answer?
I think it's positionally different too. Like if I'm a wing, I want to go somewhere else to develop. If I'm maybe a big, I'd probably want to go to Purdue to develop. Like it'd be different in there in that regard as well. So like, I don't know. Also, like if we're gonna keep it a buck, Big Ten's probably not the first conference I'm going to if I want to develop. Like honestly, I look to the Big East to be a really good player development league. Like I think UConn does a great job with it. I think Villanova did do a great job of it before Neptune took over. Marquette, I think, does a good job. Like I think that the Big East does a great job of that, like player development thing to me.
Yeah. Okay.
But like but also who doesn't? Like I could do the same thing with ACC schools.
Yeah, like any good basketball team, I think like development. It's like the talent argument. It's just like a buzzword. Like if good players come through your program, you can paint it as development, you know?
It's something to make a nice graphic.
It is a nice graphic.
Developed here, developed in Purdue, developed in Mackey.
With that said, Zach Edey is like the best player development story in a really long time, right? Because
I mean, if we're having a player development off, like that's you really can't argue with that.
Purdue
like,
wins as long as they trump the Edey card.
Yeah, like Brad's like, I mean, I took Terrence Shannon from Texas. Well, you know what? Yeah, I turned Zach Edey in from the 500th recruit in the country to the 2-time National Player of the Year.
I just want to give a shout out to the one guy that no one will ever give any love to in this conversation. You want to talk real development?
Juwan?
Look at what Trace Jackson Davis was by the end of his senior year versus when Mike Woodson first got his hands on him. Look at what Jalen Hood-Schifino was by the end of his freshman year versus the first day he put on an Indiana uniform. That is in-season development.
And the list. And list ended.